be surprised if you see that little sign come up in the corner of your Zoom box.
I am so happy I am not the only person who forgets.
Never.
Every time.
Normally I try to build it into my Zoom sessions for class. I'll just automatically add that, but I had to actively try and remember to turn it on for this one. So yeah.
Well, I do that, but I have my Zoom scheduled for a half an hour before class, just in case anybody has any questions. So I stick it on mute while I'm sitting around waiting. I mean, pause while I'm sitting around waiting, and then everybody comes in and they start asking questions, and then I forget.
Yep, you are not alone. Half the time I'm like, oh, well, I forgot to record, so I will let all of YouTube and all of you know that if you need the first half re-spoken to you, just let me know. So.
Yeah, I have to shut it off because there are pop-ups that are annoying and defocus your window, and sometimes forget to turn it back on.
Agreed. I've definitely done that a time or two, to turn it off for breakout sessions, so it's not just recording my face when no one else is with me, and then forget to turn it on after the session has ended. Yeah, I feel that.
Okay. Let's go ahead and get into things, and then I'm sure we'll have time with only such a small number of us to chit chat at the end as well. So this is something that I wanted to talk about. One of the big questions pretty much in any of the committees I'm in right now is always asking about how can we have an increase in student engagement. I feel like this is probably something that we have discussed even before COVID, when even in the traditional face-to-face classes, but especially now when students can kind of just detach and turn off their cameras and basically, you don't know if you're actually teaching the student or if you're teaching their dog or their cat or, some stuffed animal that they might have sitting in their place. And I know for me, I started out really strong. The first month of classes, all my kids were, I teach dual enrollment as well, and I should not call them kids, and I still do. All my students for the first month, they were all pretty strong. I had, shown them the research that, if you're present with me with the camera on, you actually retain it more. And then week 5 hit, and they were pretty much all like, yeah, we're done. We don't need it on anymore. And I guess I just kind of white flag because I'm not going to fight it either. But, something I want to keep everyone in mind for is that a lot of times we give homework assignments, right? So it's homework assignment, and then we're sprinkling some quizzes and some exams. But for the majority of the time, it's all basically the same thing: rinse, wash, repeat, write it down, work it out. Except that we have different point values associated with it. Homework is going to be worth less than a quiz, which is worth less than an exam. And it's not really, I think, the greatest way to bring in that motivation. And, a challenge that I would give you is if we all closed our eyes and tried to remember back to what was the most exciting assignment you ever had in your careers, as a student or, post college. I'm going to assume it's not going to be a homework assignment, and it's not going to be a quiz, and it's not going to be an exam. And that's really the focus of what we want to talk about when we think about the traditional versus the alternative. So if anyone has an exciting assessment that you remember or recall that you would like to talk about, you certainly may do so. Gail says, I tried bribery and it doesn't work. I offered 15 points, 1 per week to show your face, or that it would lower your grade. Yes, I've also tried the bribery route. Go ahead. Or you were just giving the thumbs up for good, or would you like to share?
Yeah, the one, Gail posted it is good. And then I just wanted to share alternative assessment that I've been using it for my face-to-face as well as for the remote classes. It's really interesting. I asked my students to read the chapters ahead of time And then they have to prepare a quiz by themselves. They have to prepare at least some 5 questions. And then I ask them to bring it to the class. And then I conduct trivia kind. I just, separate them into teams. And then, I conduct a trivia. And then in between, I just explain through my PowerPoints also the topics from each chapter. Okay, so that interests them a lot. And then there's more active participation from the student side. And then they don't turn off their video, I can see their faces, and then they have more interaction. I also conduct this through the breakout session, like alternate weeks, I just change the mode so that I can interact with them individually through the breakout sessions. Okay, so it's kind of interesting and they really enjoy it,
Absolutely. Yeah, I've definitely used the make your own questions up, and then if it ends up on the exam, you get a bonus point. So I have used that too. All right.
Does anyone else have other memorable favorite assessments that they had to do either as a student themselves from whenever that may have been, or something your students love that you do? I know one that I had loved when I was an undergrad. I only had one class do this, but I'm in the psychology division. And so in one of my history of psychology classes, our professor made us pick a famous psychologist and we had to debate each other from the perspective of that psychologist. And I'm going to guess, even if you're not a psych person, you might know who Sigmund Freud is. He's very, very well known, a lot of psychosexual kinds of background in his work, very outlandish in some ways. But it was a roaring good time trying to pretend to be him and debate how someone acted or why someone behaved a certain way from his perspective. And when you do that actively within the class, you're very much applying that material in a really interesting way. Made it very memorable.
Yeah. I know something that I can share from the teaching side. When I taught down in Virginia, I taught Algebra 2, and their Algebra 2 focuses a lot on the family functions. And a lot of times you can learn a little bit more with some kinesthetic learning. So I kind of don't even really remember why I did it, but I took my entire class outside with tennis balls, and I had them create different family functions using the tennis balls, which basically just kind of ended up devolving in high schoolers just beaming tennis balls at each other. But before they did that, I would call them out in 2 groups, like, in a pair, and then the class would shout at them what function they wanted them to reproduce. So if they wanted linear, they would just, pitch the ball completely up in the air as straight as they could to the other person. And then, looking back, I don't really know how the tennis balls were supposed to help me with all the family functions, but it got them moving and got them excited. And I think if I could ever actually fix it, I would do it again, but it was kind of a dismal moment. But luckily with K through 12, you have 32 weeks to make mistakes instead of just 15 and only seeing them twice a week. So I definitely think trial and error is a good method with alternative assessments. You don't necessarily have to do it the same way the next time you teach a class. But if it's something successful, then it might be something you might want to keep in your back pocket. Okay. So this slide just kind of shows you a little bit of the different ideas that, Katie had mentioned, debates. Obviously I don't know where my beaming students with golf balls, or tennis balls comes in, but that different kind of kinesthetic learning, which can be successful, but those are kind of up there for you. And I think what we really need to consider are assessments that get students using what we have taught them without just rote memorization or, being able to, word vomit what we want to hear supposedly right back to us. it really is more important for a student to be able to take what we've taught them and then have that further step, be able to like actually create something out of what they're putting together. I tell my students all the time, I would rather hear them tell me a mistaken thought than no thought at all. You know, like when I was teaching college trig last semester, I had a student who was fantastic, and he would always say, you know, do you care if I try this other approach that I think might work? And I would tell him, absolutely, you do it and we'll do it this way. And we'll see if we come to the same answer. And 9 times out of 10, he would tell me that he was unsuccessful. But it was just the fact that he was thinking and coming up to those problems, wanting to do something different, not always wanting to follow what I was saying is the correct approach. And I thought that was just phenomenal because, you know, why should we only do something the way the textbook is telling them to do it? Why should that be the only approach that we're showing them? So it actually got me thinking, and I actually do my answer keys differently now, where if I look at a problem and I come up with a method 1, then I also represent a method 2. So then that way, if I have students who think outside of that box, I can just automatically, in my mindless grading, be like, oh, there's method 2. Okay, I'm good to go. Instead of having to look at it and go, wait, what did they just do? It's not looking like the others. So I do think that's pretty great. And if we can build it into our lessons, then, you know, that's just kind of reinforcing it even more. So I'm not sure if anyone's had a similar experience to that, but it definitely made me smile.
I do, since I teach art, design, we're all project-based, presentation-based. That's everything we do. I mean, we have the quizzes and stuff and the discussion questions and all the boring stuff, but they have to put into practice everything they do or they're not going to learn it.
Yes.
I could talk until I'm green in the face and they're not going to learn it. This year I tried something new. We do a magazine project, not on this campus because I don't teach that class, but on another campus I'm at. And we do a magazine project, and I used to give them the articles on the designers and typographers.
Cool.
And as I move through life, I become more and more aware that history is written by dead old white men and of European descent, and my classes don't look like that at all. So this year I decided to go out on a limb and tell them to find their own articles and write them.
Very cool.
And the students that were into it dug deep in the internet and found some really, really cool stuff. And the students who weren't into it, the ones that just want to vomit it out, ended up giving me the old dead white men.
Yeah, absolutely. I am so glad I'm not alone in that, because there's so many times where my students are so frustrated that they don't understand why we have to do something. And I'm like, I really wish I could give you a better answer than this, but it's because some old dead white mathematician didn't have anything better to do, and this is the way we do it. So yeah, that's just fantastic to hear that it's not just in the math field.
No, but I think it's in all fields. Yeah. History was written by dead white men of European descent. And if women helped them, they sure didn't give them credit.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, fun. That's fun. Okay, so we just wanted to take a moment, and I think with the audience we have, it's probably not even a necessary slide at this point, but we wanted to kind of give a traditional versus alternative kind of idea, so we could kind of see, you know, what we see in both of those categories. So something I have found is that if we can tap into this extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation, then kind of where basically the alternative side lies is when we're actually getting them to tap into that intrinsic side. And really, when you can pull out someone's intrinsic motivation, I feel like that's where you've hit your pinnacle as a professor. You know, when you're not the reason for why they're doing something, but you've lit something inside of them to basically say, no, this is really cool, and I want to keep learning, and I want to keep doing something on my own. And that's, I think, where Katie and I both share this massive desire to want to keep trying to find new ways to bring alternative assessments into our classrooms, especially here at LCCC. So. All right.
Okay. So yeah, based on who's here, it's very clear that you guys kind of have a sense of why we should be doing this. But I think it helps to kind of pull out the big things that researchers who are trying to emphasize the importance of this have really highlighted. Kind of puts it all together in perspective. So one of the big things is that, you know, alternative assessments have the potential to be more inclusive. Students who are being traditionally tested with quizzes or exams, if they're doing really well, that's awesome. But there are going to be plenty of students who are not going to be demonstrating their knowledge and skills through that modality. And so by including alternative assessments, you have the potential to really open up the options for these students who are not that traditional kind of success oriented, to really show how much they know and how much they can do. It also tends to be more authentic to the real world. Most positions, most careers, you know, we're not going into these other careers and taking a test every other day. Many people are not even writing, writing essays every other day. And so including other kinds of assessments, we have the potential to make it more real world for these kids, and kids being, you know, all of those who we are helping to succeed academically. I often get stuck in that niche of calling them kids too, like Jay did earlier, but they're not all that young. And so in any case, we have the potential to make them more authentic towards the real world, really bridging the gap between what happens in the classroom, what they're supposed to get out of it, and how they're supposed to use it when they leave us, which is, you know, really why they're with us to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Alternative assessments also tend to be really performance-based, which is pretty good because these students, they're forced to kind of integrate different skills and their knowledge to create some product. Like Gail was mentioning about the art, always producing something, but we can do that with any discipline as well. Trying to produce something that really demonstrates how much they know and how much they can do, again, in that really new or novel way, but really bridging that gap between classroom and real world. Plus, when they go on internships or interviews, they can actually talk about this thing that they made in some capacity, whether it's in some kind of portfolio of their work, art or otherwise, that really showcases what they can do. Not just saying, yeah, I learned this theory, but here it is on paper, I can produce it for you. Now, they can also be really useful for showing progress. All too often, our traditional assessments, those quizzes, exams, even essays, are one time point. Students can memorize a bunch of information and regurgitate it into that assessment, which really doesn't tell us if they truly understand the material, if they can do anything with it. And so by using alternative assessments, we can have the potential to see progress, not just showing their strengths and what's improving, but also seeing where they're still stuck, what skills they're still not really infusing into their work. And lastly, as Jay already hinted, we can really facilitate that intrinsic motivation. We tend to find that students, when they want to do something, they're going to do it better than if they didn't want to do it. That is not rocket science to any of us. And so by making these alternative assessments possible, they are more likely to want to do well because they see its value. They see the point of this assignment for outside the class, of why they're paying money to be here, to take our classes, and to use it after they leave. And so they're more inclined to want to do well. And we also will see just what they know and what they can do because they tried that much harder.
Mm-hmm.
So at this point, we'd like to take not a break per se, but get you guys to tell us a little bit about your perspectives about, what obstacles, if any, you have already faced in trying to incorporate different kinds of alternative assessments. Or if you're saying, I'm not really doing this right now, I want to do more, what obstacles do you expect to encounter? Because there's a reason many people are not using these all the time, or I should say there's many reasons people aren't using these all the time. But we'd like to hear from you guys about what those obstacles may be for you to try and talk about possible solutions before we continue on. And again, if you guys feel more comfortable in the chat, feel free, or just go ahead and unmute yourself because we have a pretty small group here.
This is a bit more of a general trend I've noticed. The students kind of see us as more of a vending machine than a source of education. I paid my money, I took the test, give me my A, basically. And what I run into is when we do some of these alternative assignments, like I like to do projects and presentations, I run into, well, this isn't one of our traditional assignments. I push back of, I just don't want to do this. This is too much work. I'm just going to take the lower grade. And I'm not really sure how we get around that.
That's a really interesting point. I've never heard that analogy before, the vending machine. That made a very wonderful image, a little sad as well in my own head. So thank you for that, Andrew. But yeah, that's a really interesting point. I think I too see that in some ways. My students haven't pushed back necessarily, but I've definitely noticed a couple kind of just, they're like, I'm going to take the hit on the lower grade because I don't have time for this, which I think speaks to other situations outside the classroom. The students, I noticed that they're the ones who they're working 2 jobs and they have multiple kids and they're trying to get their education, but also have all their other responsibilities. And I think that's part of its own problem too, but that's a really complicated obstacle. I think that's a good one. Thank you. I'm gonna think about that a little bit more, how we might be able to overcome that. But while my brain keeps churning, does anyone else have other obstacles as well?
I think that the obstacles I see are partly because of how they're being taught now in lower schools. Back in the Stone Ages when I was in school, you weren't hand fed everything, and we weren't learning to take tests. We were learning to learn.
Yes.
So you in the process, you learn common sense, you learn critical thinking, you learn to look at a problem and analyze it and come up to the solution without going, Miss Jones, can you come over here and help me? And now that the lower schools are teaching more to pass those standardized testings so that the school districts can get money from the government to run the schools, I'm seeing less and less. I'm seeing less critical thinking. I'm seeing less independent thinking. I'm seeing less common sense and a lot more, for lack of a better description, can you hold my hand? Please tell me exactly what you want me to do to get an A on this project, because it's always an A on the project. They don't understand that failure is actually the best teacher and its best friend is trial and error. So they want it do A, B, C, D, E, so I can get an A. And in my field, I can't do that because your client out in the real world is not going to do that. They're going to hand you some information and say, here, make me a business card or make me a brochure, and I need it next Tuesday.
I think both of those kind of go hand in hand. I really appreciate that, Andrew and Gail, that you both spoke up about that. Because I think those speak to really important points about, our students do in some ways want to know what they have to do to get it right. not necessarily realizing that right might be really complicated. And so my churning brain, as it's kind of work through what might be a way to help overcome that, might be to simply start small. I know I have a research project. My students in my research methods class have to do a full semester project, but I break everything down into really small assignments. Like they just have to do an outline 1 week for their introduction section. Then the next time they have to write the draft, but they've already outlined it, they've already found articles. And so maybe one solution is simply to start small, to try and lessen that initial resistance to this really big project. In many ways, students just get, I think, intimidated. They want to do things right. And if they don't know what that looks like, then their initial gut just says no. And so maybe starting really small could be one possible way. And it could be as small as an in-class assignment where they do simply a concept map, or that mind mapping where they pick out things they remember that could be important for the project later.
I found that doesn't work. Big,
What
small. I mean, I would give them, back when we were in a classroom, I would give them an exercise in class to do while I was there supervising them to help them before I would give them the assignment. And it doesn't matter how many pieces I break it into. They, you know, the ones that are really motivated are going, why is this broken down into so many pieces? The ones that want it in so many pieces, want it into another dozen pieces. They want one project to take all semester.
Right.
And it's not real life. I'm trying to train them for the workforce, and they're not going to succeed. I can tell by the 3rd week of school who is going to succeed, have potential to succeed in the workforce, and who is not, just by their work ethic and how they approach the tasks.
Yeah.
I tend to get around the what do I need to do for the grade I want with rubrics. It seems to work well, at least for my field. It probably is not a one size fits all situation. The problem I have with rubrics is them just not reading it.
Yes.
Which I don't know how we solve that one either. Because we had that previous development day thing where they talked about bandwidth. And I completely get it. When you come home from work after just being at school, you're spent. Give me my cup of tea. I'm going to sleep. I'm done with this. I don't care if there's a due date or whatever I have to worry about. I've just been going for 16 hours. I get it. Who won't get it is, like you mentioned, the employer. The employer is going to hammer them for that. And I think we need to answer the question just as educators, what is education actually for when we talk about the workforce? I think a lot of problems have been created by deciding to slant things towards what we are now in the workforce preparation mode, instead of we are giving them a background so that they can develop their own skills for working. I think by taking a lot of the training off of corporations and employers, we've kind of sort of pigeonholed ourselves into a problem we have to solve. I think that's the exact opposite direction we wanted to go. We went bigger instead of smaller. My apologies.
Well, I think what you guys are bringing up is that, you know, there is no one perfect solution, because this problem is something that we're going to be kind of fighting for a very long time, really trying to balance out the needs of our students, what they are feeling confident and able to address. I mean, in some ways, some of what we're hearing is that, you know, some students just, they push back, they want to be helped, they want to know exactly what they have to do because they haven't figured out that how to feel uncomfortable. And so simply building up their self-efficacy could also be really useful, knowing that they can do these really complicated things. You know, that's one of the hardest things my students in my reading and writing research class is that there is not a perfect answer on how to perfectly do a literature search. You could have all the right parameters and still not find the article you're looking for. And so that feeling uncomfortable is good. And so helping our students to even just get used to that, how to build up their self-confidence and be someone that can solve problems by presenting the problems themselves, and then trying to balance out all the needs that we as educators have to meet. It's going to be an uphill battle for a while. There's no perfect solution to this very complicated problem.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I mean, Katie and I kind of ran into that with this workshop as well. I wrote the entire outline that Kelly had requested of us, and then I started this presentation, and I got to a point where I emailed Katie and said, my brain has now broken. I tried to do the lit search, and I can't find anything that supports us. So tag, you're it. And she came through, but it was also very limited in what both of us were able to find. But I knew her research skills would come into good use, so she was able to find us something. So something I wanted to share with you guys is, I think for some of us, alternative assessments, and I am going to say us because again, it's very clear that the people involved in this current workshop are all probably in the same basket. Our brains are already there. We feel that alternative assessment is a good thing, and we probably should be doing more of it. So I don't think I need to say what I originally was going to say with this, and that is to try and hammer home how important alternative assessment is. I think that's covered. What I will say is that sometimes I think, coming from the instructor, the professor side, we're so used to having departments tell us what we are and are not allowed to do, that then when we come up with what excites us and we have these really great ideas, it all just kind of depends on who's in charge of the class that you're teaching, if you're going to be allowed to do it or not. A perfect example for me is that I taught the Math 150 in person. Of course, it was last spring, and I had gotten the okay from the professor in charge of the Math 150 to kind of teach it a little bit differently, because there was only 3 sections and my section was the only one in Tamaqua. I basically came up kind of like with what Katie was describing, of a full semester long project. And basically they were supposed to, much like Gail does, they were supposed to pretty much immerse themselves as if they had been given a real life project by their boss. And basically I was their boss. And then I told them that at the very end of it, they would have to present to a professional panel, which they still did. They ended up having to do it over YouTube, and I still sent it out, and they were still graded by a professional panel. But much like Katie as well, I split it up into small obtainable pieces. They all worked together. Of course, when COVID hit, they had no idea what to do, and their brains broke, and they couldn't realize that we were basically doing everything online anyway, so they could still continue doing it. And it turned out to be pretty good. But I also had to defend myself. I had to say, there's no reason why I can't do this project. It literally hits every single aspect and then some, compared to what your final does. And it's literally giving them a tangible item that they can take with them. And it's also just tapping into this whole other side. We have so many students that fight with, dyslexia and, test anxieties and all this stuff, we literally have a whole department whose job is to literally send me memos on, this is what this student's disability is. Yes. And this is what this student has to go through. And, I always respond to those the same way, which is, I treat every single one of my students as if they have a disability. As interesting as it is to say that, I never expect, I always have a high expectation of my students, but I always help them get there. It's not like our courses are supposed to be taken, in how I view it, as if they're on a lone island and they have to learn how to fend for themselves. I'm not saying that they're getting handheld either, but I am saying that their whole life they're going to have resources. So being able to learn in a cooperative environment, to me, is just as just as important of a resource as learning to spit answers up on a test for me is. Another thing that I do that maybe I hope is not setting students up for failure in the real world, but I guess I kind of see it as drafts in a way. Like an employer can be like, hey, I want to see your draft on blah, 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 blah. And granted, in math, I don't often have them write things except for that project. But I try to take away some of the test anxiety by telling them as long as they score within a certain range, they can make corrections for me. And they have to pay it though. They don't get the full credit back. They get half credit back. And they have to decide if their time and energy is worth half credit or not. But to me, at least, it shows me that if someone, has an F, D, or a C, how much ethic do they have there? Is it worth their time to try and get a better grade, or are they just going to take that C, D, or the F? I obviously don't force them to do it. It's up to them. It's just an option that they have. But I do think from the alternative side as an educator that we can have some flashback on it. So it's definitely understandable. Go ahead, Kate.
So based on who we have here, it's clear that you guys know the importance of including alternative assessments and wanting to try and incorporate these into your courses. One thing we thought would be important for this was to kind of talk about, what does the data actually say? I am not long out of grad school, and data was such an important part of testing your findings, your hypotheses, and seeing what are you getting? Is there any, I'm going to loosely use the word proof. Mm-hmm. And so in digging for this workshop, we actually find that there's not a ton out there, which is on one hand surprising, because here using alternative assessments is not a new thing. Emphasizing the importance of it is not relatively new, and yet the people who are using them aren't the ones doing research about it. And so we don't have a lot of that concrete evidence of what is out there is good. There's a lot of stuff for high school and college in particular, and in general, the outcomes are positive for the students. Across the board, they tend to have a better recall and sort of maintaining that knowledge of the information they were trying to learn over their semester, long-term as well. Plus, they also the students tend to report having other kinds of gains. Like at least this one study, they reported that the high school students had a better sense of just group skills. They had a better feeling about how to manage conflict, how to divide up tasks equally, which is something we kind of take for granted that they're going to figure out. But not everyone understands those to the same degree or has had opportunities to practice. And so incorporating projects, or at least team-focused ones, also means that they're developing these other kinds of skills. And in the college learners, in particular for this study, they also just report having this really positive outlook towards the learning, towards the project, what they were being asked to do. They saw its value. They saw how it pertained to the real world, really going back to that authenticity of the work and inclusivity. And so here, there's evidence that, all the things we've been saying, it's important, it's good, it's true, at least for the evidence we have so far. Go ahead and click, Jay. So we do have one little case study that I can briefly mention. And so this one, I'm drawing a little bit on my psychology background, hopefully not too much for you. This is a case study that was one project from a course that was really trying to tie together the ideas of positive psychology, this idea that we're not just surviving, we're thriving, how to help people flourish and be mentally well. And kind of tying that in with organizations, how to improve workforces. And so this college course really tried to bring those together by having their students apply positive psych concepts to improving their client. And this client was a department on their campus. So like the English department or the chemistry department. And so these teams of students were sent to work with these different departments over the course of a semester to apply interventions and talk to the department employees about how they can improve that department. How can they improve their little workforce? And so it required having to understand various aspects of well-being, such as how to use social support, how to find who your social support is, how to identify the strengths of your team members, And so they applied all these different aspects of well-being in working with these clients and doing interventions with them. Plus, there was the added requirement for the course that they had to try and apply the concepts to themselves. So it's kind of a double hit of application. And to assess how well the students actually did, not just in completing the project, but their knowledge, they used a well-being competency assessment, which just assessed their wide range of knowledge on well-being, and then also measured how much their own well-being improved over the course of the semester. Go ahead and click Jay. And in general, I won't bother you with the very nitty-gritty stats, but in general, there was almost this across the board effect of finding improvements in personal well-being as well as their general knowledge. And so this is separate from like how well the team did. This is just individual. We're finding that students, by doing this project, are going to have improvements in their knowledge of the topic that the project was based on, well-being, and their own well-being improved. And so here is just one very clear piece of evidence that these alternative assessments, even though we're not checking their knowledge in the same traditional ways, they're benefiting from it. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Jay. And so we've talked about these obstacles, things that come up. Well, we want to do this, but maybe it's a little challenging. And I don't think I have to convince you that we want to do this. You're all here because you do. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's, snap your fingers, hey, I have an alternative assessment and I'm going to rock it. It'd be great if that was exactly how it worked, right? And so before we let you guys have some time to chat about how you might actually try something in your own course, I like to give a couple of hints or helpful pieces of advice. One is to really try to hone in on your goal of your assessment. Think back to those very basic learning outcomes you had for the course, as well as what you want them to get out of some kind of project. If you were thinking, maybe I'll replace an exam, okay, well, what did you want them to get out of that exam? What was the point of the exam? To assess their knowledge on what topic? That starting there can be a great place, just like you would any other assessment, to trying to figure out what you could do. Mm-hmm. And then try to think about, how do you see that information, that learning outcome in the real world? How could you take something that's happening in the real world out in the workforce and consider how might it look in the classroom? If it's not perfectly replicable, as many things are, is there a key feature or two that could be translated in some way? And if you can think about taking that one outcome that you were really focused on, what might it look like or how might it appear in the real world? That is a really good place to start with whether your project that you're trying to do is huge or even very small. Mm-hmm. And go ahead and click Jay.
Oops, did I go
too far?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
One other thing I tend to recommend is you don't have to try and start big. You can start smaller and see how it goes. Find ways to overcome those pushbacks as students. It could be you try something in the classroom and just see, how are they remembering this information I taught today? It could be that small, like a little concept map, something very, very contained that they push back a lot. You can figure out a way to work with that over time, but they can still get something out of it. They don't have to lose a ton of points right in that moment. But you can also go a little bit bigger. And Jay, you want to give your example?
Yeah. So what I offered some of my students for when I taught their trig class is, this is an example of a project, which I also emailed in case anyone wanted to look kind of closer at it. The publisher has them. This one, I believe, is actually in their textbook. So it was not an option that I gave them for the projects, but I said they could do a project for each chapter because it obviously covered all of the same material as the exam, or they could take the final exam. I didn't care which one they would choose to do. I was fine and happy grading either. It just turned out that the majority of them preferred the paper pencil test. Not really saying one thing or the other, but perhaps if we would have been in person and I could have given them projects throughout the semester instead of all tagged on at the end, they may have decided to do the projects. We won't really know. I can't go back in time yet. So Katie, I guess it's up to you if you just want them to talk in person.
Yeah, so we've got about 10 minutes left. Our time window was for an hour. We don't want to take more. We know that you made the choice to be here. We fully appreciate that, but we know that you have busy lives outside of this workshop. So let's try and use these last 10 minutes for you guys to kind of brainstorm yourselves and talk. I'm kind of thinking, since it is such a small group, maybe we can just hear some ideas you guys have, or actually, if we go a little off script, maybe we'll take 2 minutes. I love doing this in my own class. Getting you guys to do a little bit, what I like to call a free write. I don't know if you guys have ever used stuff like that in your own classes. For me, it's just a time that I tell my students, I'm going to mute myself. They won't be distracted by me talking. And I let them write or type, whatever their modality is, any ideas that come to mind on the topic we're using. And so for you guys here, this is trying to incorporate some kind of alternative assessment into your own course. And since you are all from different backgrounds, I think having maybe 2 minutes, take your moment to collect your thoughts. What might you do? What kind of outcome could you see incorporating into your course? And then we'll talk about some of these ideas, hopefully to help you carry forward what you would want to actually use in your class. Does that sound all right with everyone? I'm kind of going off our script there. Cool. Then Jay, why don't we we'll be quiet for like 2 minutes, let everyone collect their ideas.
Okay. I don't want anyone to run out of time, so if you would like to share, you certainly may.
Was that enough time for anyone to collect some ideas? Didn't want to run out too much, but it looked like everyone had a thinking face on, which is really positive.
Thinking face. So I'll run it out there then. The alternative assignment I'm debating right now is when we cover cell biology, we cover the pieces of the cell, what makes up the cell, the little components that make it run. And instead of traditional lecture format where you're giving them the information, I would rather them in groups present it to the rest of us. Because I've noticed, just in general, when it's me handing it out, maybe 60, 70% of it sticks. The rest of it does not. And I think just the experience of communicating in a group is good for them to get started now, because they're going to have to do it throughout their lives. And it's another way to evaluate, other than having them memorize these components and put them on a quiz.
Yes. Nice. Yeah, the flip script is always a great approach, I think. I would love if I could give, each one of my students a section and let them, really dive deep into that section and then present it to their peers. But I don't know, haven't figured out which class to do that for.
Anyone else want to share an idea?
Yeah. Can I share my
Your screen?
assessment?
Sure.
Okay.
Give me 1 second. I think we have to give you guys permission, but we are happy to do that. Let's see, I'm going to make you a co-host, which should give you that ability. Go ahead, Selvi.
I teach macroeconomics and microeconomics. Okay, so in my macroeconomics class, I teach information about United States, and I gave a group project for the students. So each group, they have to get information about country. So by the time they finish the course, they'll know about at least some 5 to 6 countries, what's going on there, what's the problem over there. Okay, in addition to knowing about United States. I also teach microeconomics, and I assign individual projects for the students, and each student has to collect information about one particular business, like what is the structure, what is the products they are, services they are being provided, and then they're producing, and then what is the financial condition, what is the profit loss, whatever I'm teaching in class, they can just relate it to the business they've chosen. It can be a family enterprise. Some students, they come up with a family enterprise and then they give a lot of information. And then some students, they work in a firm and then they talk about it. And it's been quite advantageous. And sometimes they even find jobs, they share the information and then they say like, when people are hiring here, you can just apply for the jobs. And then some students, they even found jobs and they were quite happy. This is what I've been doing every semester, for these 2 courses. And maybe I'm just, I encountered one problem in doing this group project thing, Some students, they were hesitant to present the project. I asked them to present it because of their language skill. And then, some people, they have anxiety. But I try my level best to, prepare them ahead of time and then, make them present it for the 2 minutes, 3 minutes time. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to, I just have to improve that part, the presentation part. That's it. That's what I thought I could share my experience.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay.
Are there any other ideas, or does someone have any ideas of what they wish they could include? Haven't figured out a way to do it yet? Or Kristen, do I remember correctly? You said you work as a learning specialist, so you're working more with these students who come in for some kind of assistance on something. Is there anything from your perspective that they wish teachers were doing, but maybe aren't? Not necessarily the folks in here, but more generally.
Yeah, that would be very valuable.
So that was one of the reasons why I wanted to jump on today was, dependent on the disability, I have students who their IQ levels will just knock you over. They're so intelligent, and, just writing a paper is difficult because that's not something, that they're worried about as far as, tell me how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. That it's kind of like the last on their list. So when I look at, I work with every instructor here, so I'm able to jump in some of their YouTubes and their Canvas videos and things like that. And one thing I've seen is that the more variety and choice you give when you're doing a project and breaking it into the smaller steps, like Katie said, is really important. So bullet pointing what you want them to do. So as opposed to writing it in a paragraph for them, you want a bullet point. Breaking something into smaller pieces, like in the class I taught, they did e-portfolio. So in there, you want them to include some of the projects that they're proud of, and a resume. So you're going to have to break all of that into, okay, you know, looking at the About Me page and then going on to the projects page. I love the idea of a student taking each piece of that and teaching the other students. That would be something I'm going to incorporate if I teach this again. But students like videos. If you can video yourself and create a YouTube channel, oftentimes spoken word is much different when they hear it a second time, so they can replay it again. Don't get frustrated, reach out to us because we can help you. We'll brainstorm and try and come up with something in an alternative assessment. I know the hard part is testing. You know, sometimes students encouraging the screen readers, things like that is important, especially now that they're testing at home. So having that test be able to be read to them as opposed to reading it themselves. I like to think about incorporating talent, whatever talents they have. So if they're really, really interested in something, there's some way to work it in there. But it's anytime you need anything, just reach out to us. I know it's hard. I have to jump on with a student right now, but if you could, Jay and Katie, if you can share, I know I got sent one thing already, share alternative assessments with us so that we can continue to look at when we build the syllabus and do all of that, how we can incorporate it.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for this. This was great.
Awesome. So glad you enjoyed it. Thanks for stopping
Thank
in
you.
and joining us today.
Okay, everyone have a good weekend.
You too.
Bye.
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 And we do realize it is after 11, so we don't want